Alright, so today I want to make a video on something that I've talked about briefly in videos before, but I wanted to make a video specifically about it, and it's the RK selection theory, and it's something that if you want to understand politics, the psychology behind why people vote and believe the things they believe, and the evolution behind it, you need to understand this stuff. In that RK tends to line up pretty similarly. Obviously, there's some exceptions, but it tends to line up pretty consistently with your left and right, the right being more K and the left being more R. And that a lot of people, when they hear something like this, they probably won't believe it because they've kind of been lied to about it. But when you explain it, it makes pretty good sense unless you got your head pretty deep in the sand. But I'm not going to read too much about the descriptions of it. I'm just going to kind of briefly go over this chart here in that R's tend to be more unstable and unpredictable. K's tend to be more stable and predictable. So you have, the traditional, Republican or conservatives. They're always thought of as pretty boring because they always want the same stuff over and over. The left tends to be, again, very unpredictable. And that you look at the Democratic debates, some of the things they're saying that they want to do are just crazy. Like example, unstable and unpredictable. A great way to put it. Um, Unpredictable in that they're for women's rights, but they want to bring in Muslims who don't believe in women's rights. They claim that climate change is a big issue, but they don't want to cut the national debt. Things like that they constantly contradict themselves in that's the unpredictableness of it. Morality rate, density independent and high for R's, density dependent and low for K's. Population size, this is a big one in that R's it's high and below the carrying capacity, and K's it's low and near the carrying capacity. And that you have your K's who tend to not have a lot of kids, even though they tend to be the more wealthy or rich people in society, and then you have the R's who have a lot of kids and they don't have a lot of money. And then you look at the all the third, fourth world countries in the world that they're all poor, but they have a lot of kids. And you look at the typical white American or Canadian or even European, they don't have a lot of kids, even though they have plenty of money to afford those kids. I guess to be fair, the cost of living is much higher in a Western country, but still you can afford to have more kids, definitely. And that the other thing with the left too is that the idea of actually let's just get into it. Selection favors, and on the R side you have rapid development, small size. In the K side you have slow development and larger size. And that anything that takes longer to develop is by definition more complicated, more sophisticated, all that kind of stuff. So the R's, they tend to be not as intelligent, and you see that same thing with the left. The people tend to not make as much. They're not as intelligent. The K's have longer development. They tend to make more money. They're more intelligent, which is, look at the. I think this is kind of changing nowadays, and just the bias of the universities and stuff. But K's by definition are more intelligent and larger brain size. R's have a shorter lifespan, which obviously for the reason of intelligence. The less intelligent you are, generally, the shorter you're going to live, and obviously the opposite is true. Parental care is low with the R side. K, it's high, which is why you see the left constantly going after the quote unquote family structure. Most single parents tend to be R's or on the left, especially the women. And on the K side, you have people who tend to care more about kids. They're more caring, and they generally do a better job with the upbringing of their kids because. I wanted to explain a little bit about the evolutionary side, and that both side people ask, okay, well, which side is better? And that you do need a bit of a balance of both. The problem is too many R's means that there's going to be mass starvation, there's going to be mass die-offs. Too many K's, life is just gonna become kind of stagnant. And so you do need a little bit of both, but if you're gonna have more of one, you definitely want more Ks. But the evolutionary perspective of R came from the idea that, or a place when resources were very finite, in that I guess R's flourish in an area, in a place where there wasn't a lot of resources, because R's, if let's say there's a war and all the men are going off to war and a lot of them are probably dying, well, you need the R theory is going to flourish, because the R theory is, let's pump out a lot of kids, let's not really care about raising them and all that stuff, because if we don't pump out a lot of kids, well, our tribe or our group is going to die off. So that's kind of where the R theory came from, and the K is kind of the opposite, in that the problem with the R's is eventually when there gets to be too many R's, the R's always, the idea of resources being finite, it doesn't really make sense to R's. So eventually they'll overuse resources, they'll die off, and in the process of them dying off, the K theory people are more likely to reproduce, and they'll generally live longer. They'll flourish better than the R's, so then they'll be more likely to reproduce, and they'll become more of them. So that's kind of the difference. One of the big things with this is that the difference is the idea of resources being finite. Like I said, it doesn't make sense to the R's. It does to the K's, which is why you have, whenever the idea of immigration is brought up, you have the leftists or the R people who, the idea that we can't just print a bunch of money and bring all these people in, that makes sense to them, because the idea of recognizing threats down the road, it's not something that R's generally think about. It probably doesn't even cross their mind. The idea of planning for the future and all that kind of stuff is more of a K thing, or a right-wing thing, in that people will say, well, we can't bring in too many immigrants, because how are we going to pay for them? Because immigrants from the third world tend to be net negatives on society, which means we either need to print money, or we need to tax people more, on top of the already high taxes in pretty well everywhere in the Western world. So it doesn't really work that way. But like I said, the left is that's a foreign concept to them. So that's why they always have to throw out the accusations of racism and whatever prejudice they say it is, because to them it's a completely foreign concept that that we need to worry about things down the road. Which is why when people on the left claim to care about climate change, it's like I said, it's a complete it's laughable, because that's the one thing that they claim to care about the future, which they don't actually care about the future. They care. Most of the people supporting it are just useful idiots, but the people at the top are people who they just view it as another way of taxing the populace, of having more government control, all that kind of stuff. So I'm not gonna go too in depth. I think I've done a pretty good job about talking about the difference, but the one big thing to take away is that a lot of people on the right and a lot of people on the left, they think that the other side is completely crazy, and that it's like, why in the world would they think that way? But the reason why is mainly the RK selection thing, and that the studies have shown that when people are given facts contradictory to their worldview or their position, a lot of the time, in fact I think it's most of the time, they'll double down on their position. And it's not because they're crazy, it's because they're R selected or they're K selected usually, and that they're going to believe what they're going to believe no matter what. And that's how evolution has determined things. And that, I guess, the left always, and I mean the right nowadays, a lot of people too, they're big on evolution, but they deny the evolution of things like this. They'll deny the evolution of the difference between races, all that kind of stuff. But that's a different video for a different day. So I'm not going to get too much more into this. But like I said, people aren't crazy. They're trying to maximize their own ability to be more high up in society, or their own sexual market value, whatever you want to call it. So they're not crazy. They're like I said, they're just trying to maximize their own sexual market value and their own ability to reproduce. So that's about all for this video. I just wanted to make a video on this because I think it's a very important topic that not a lot of people talk about. So if you like that video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more.